Hi, I'm Jeremy from Idle Media. I'm here with Polly Higgins and Charles Eisenstein. We've just finished an evening about sacred economics and sacred law. And so my first question for both of you is actually, what is your definition or meaning when you say the word sacred in this context?
Charles?
Well, any definition of the sacred makes it into a little less than it is.
Yes.
It's something that we recognize when we encounter it.
Yeah.
I think every time for me it has something to do with the unique and the connected.
Right.
So like a commodity, something that's identical to some other thing, it doesn't really land on us as sacred. But when we truly appreciate something, maybe not as a tree, not as just some member of a generic category, but as a unique individual that's connected to the rest of life, then we appreciate the sacredness of it.
Right, yes. Yeah.
So sacred economics then would be an economic system that embodies that understanding.
Yeah. And I heard you say earlier in the evening, it's something that doesn't have a finite value. You can't place an economic value on just destroying the environment, for example.
So this is a very deep paradox that we have to wrestle with.
Yeah.
How do you? What happens when you assign a price to the infinite?
Yes.
When you try to measure that which is beyond measure.
Yeah.
You have to be very careful.
Yeah.
And perhaps that's saying that the realm of the economy, the realm of the measured, the realm of quantity, needs to perhaps shrink because it's kind of taken over everything now.
Yeah.
And probably the same is true of the law. Like, why should everything be within the realm of either the prohibited or the allowed? Like, what about the kind of social undefined realm? Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think for me, sacred is also something that really, Charles, you mentioned this about deep appreciation, but it's something more in terms of looking at sacred law. It's sometimes this is also about recognizing that there are inherent values that can guide our lives, and that really, if we engage with a way of looking at life that actually understands that life itself is sacred, then it's something it's immutable. It's such a strong premise of understanding that it can really govern the way we think, the way we act, the way that we engage. Law is, at the end of the day, just the written terms of engagement of life. It just happens to be written down. And those who really understand the sacredness of life are governed by their own internal laws, so to say, about that, their own internal terms of engagement around why life matters, why it's important to care.
Yeah. So deep down, we all really understand what sacred means.
And deep down, we understand that everything is sacred.
Okay.
But we're not fully connected to that, so we need special things to remind us of what's universal.
In fact, we need to take away things because of it's deep down, but it's covered.
Yeah.
So okay. I mean, what we're going through now, people talk about economic crisis, climate change, population problems, and these things are kind of happening. They're related to things happening out in the real world, but it's also a story we're telling ourselves about what's happening. And Polly mentioned earlier about the healing process, and before things get better, you go through this horrible phase when you're in bed shivering for 3 days or whatever, and perhaps that's where we are now, and that's a story, if you like. So how does what you're working on relate to going through this transition from what you term as an old world to a new world?
Yeah, there is definitely, for me, a sense of transitioning here, and the recognition that, it's not always workable to suddenly go from one paradigm to a completely different one. There are bridges that can help facilitate that shift. And for me, using law that comes from a place of intrinsic values rather than imposed values is very much an important bridge that can allow us to transition into that place.
Yeah, because I heard you talk about that actually what we want is a place where we don't need laws.
Exactly.
But that's a little way away.
And that's very much about what comes after that transitioning. Because once you have society, civilization as a whole, individually as well as collectively buying into, or rather engaging, buying's not really the right word, but engaging in a system that puts intrinsic values first and foremost, then we start taking responsibility not just for our own actions, but actually as a collective whole. We understand that interconnectedness of life. You know, what we do here can have adverse impacts over there. So we start taking responsibility for that. And when we do take responsibility, then the written law falls away. And actually what happens is law becomes replaced with lore, new types of stories as to how we engage with life itself, where the sacredness of life is central to that story making, to that engagement of how we actually engage with life.
So I think there's one point where you said, actually, this is not about law or economics, it's about how we engage with life.
Yes.
And okay, so we have the tonight was about economics and law. What are the other realms of society do you think that we need to include in this then?
Well,
embrace?
everyone.
Yes.
Technology, science, religion, medicine, education, politics.
Yes.
Media.
Media.
Let's not leave that out, right?
Sacred media.
Definitely.
And all of these things can be reconceived from what you were just saying, a new story. You know, a new set of interpretations, a new framework of meaning. And I think that all of these institutions are going through a parallel transition. And we were just talking about it tonight, you know, that really what it's about reunion, about oneness, about interconnection, about love. Let's just say it like it is.
Sure.
Love.
It's about love.
Because there's that's the underlying story, isn't it? One of the things is about going back to what we know. You know, you talked about Buddhism, indigenous culture, oneness, which is going back, but also at the same time we're going forward and we're imagining new ways of being. So we're going back to our roots, but we're progressing at the same time. There's a paradox in that somewhere, which is a story, I think. Okay, so you're talking here about the common value of love, and you gave tonight was talking about sacred. I also heard you talk about the common value of freedom. So what are really the common values that tonight was about?
Well, for me, it's really about the oneness of life, the interconnectedness, the interdependency that we all have. That's one of the three fundamental values that really shape the lens, the prism of how I engage with life. That's the sacredness of life. And the third one really is that love is all. I do really believe that when we come from a place of love, it engages us from a very different position as to how we make decisions in our life, how we engage with others, how we actually function as human beings. And when we come from a place of love, everything we do, everything we say, everything we think shifts quite dramatically. And to make a conscious decision to want to come from a place of love rather than fear, hatred, anger, terror, jealousy, it's an emotion that actually carries a completely different dynamic, different energy as well.
Of course.
And in turn it attracts in that energy as well. So it becomes self-reinforcing.
Okay.
I can add another common thing to the list. That would be gratitude.
Oh yeah.
You know.
I so agree. But isn't gratitude maybe a sort of manifestation of love in a way?
Well, I mean, all these things probably come down to the same thing. But you know, sometimes it helps for me to think in terms of gratitude because, especially when we were talking about, you know, whether it's stewardship of Earth or the deep religious foundation. What was the word you were using to describe like the duty of care? What was it?
It's a legal duty of care.
The legal duty of care. You know, like where does that come from? I think it comes from gratitude. You know, like this amazing earth, this life has been given to us, and what do we do with it?
Yeah.
You know, what do we do with the treasure that is each other?
Mm.
You know, and when we tap into the gratitude, then we want to do beautiful things with it, and treat it as a gift, and that leads to economics, because economics, when you uncover all of the measure and the quantification and the competition, really it's economics is about how gifts circulate among human beings. Yeah.
And the legal duty of care is a legal construct that has arisen out of trusteeship law. So it's arisen out of law that is there about viewing ourselves in a stewardship role, a guardianship role as trustees. And for me, this is about us all being trustees of Earth. Being Earth trustees. And when we see ourselves in that, and it's a relationship to be a trustee, it's fundamentally a different place than being disconnected. Property ownership can create huge disconnect, but to see yourself as a trustee, you're always looking to the wider community, and because you are there to be in service, to give assistance for others. And that is also fundamentally premised in the idea of gratitude, because you're actually putting into something that's bigger than the self, because you understand that this is greater and that you're grateful. You know, these words are all interconnected here. Greater, grateful, gratitude, trust. Actually, the etymological root for trust is truth, which also comes from tree. And the roots of life. So, you know, there's this whole kind of, the language that we're using seems to be embodied in kind of natural law. You know, natural law is using a different terminology here.
Yeah. And then we know how to behave lovingly, we know how to trust and give. For Christmas, we're all going to sit there with our families in that environment, you know, with your lovers, with your friends, with your family. So what you're asking for is for people to expand the sphere of who they're trusting, giving, and loving with. And we can all do that. We can all expand our sphere a little bit. And I heard you talk it early in the evening, and the people that are holding up the old systems, you know, it's all of us. And you have a great faith that these people, we know they're loving and trusting people within their sphere of influence. You know, that guy that's holding up an old economic system is still going back and being loving with his family. And so we're not really in conflict. But what I have the question for you, if you sat down to speak to those people, like whatever you want to call them, the power of the 1%, the people that can really make these changes at a system level, what would you say to them? How would you get your story across and convince them to come on board? Because that's what you need to do.
I wouldn't try to convince them to come on board unless they signaled in some way that their story of the world, their belief system wasn't really working for them anymore. If there was some kind of invitation, then I might offer an alternative. If not, then what I would do, what I try to do, is to just relate to them in a way that on some level doesn't fit into the story of all against all that they're operating from. So that would be to be generous, to be non-judgmental, to be like this living exception to what they keep telling themselves is true.
Right, yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think also for me, this is not so much about being coercive, but being inspiring. I read a very good book, Simon Sinek's The Art of Why, about inspiring leadership. And that, in fact, if you inspire someone, that can trigger a far greater dynamic within someone, rather than trying to persuade them, convince them into something that they're not comfortable with. So for me, this is more about scattering seeds of a different way of thinking and being and doing, and letting go of the consequences. So allowing these ideas to come out and letting it seed. You know, different people pick up different aspects as well, wherever they are in their life at their given time.
Yeah.
I think, I think inspiring is exactly what I was trying to say.
Yeah. And you do.
Well, like I was thinking, I keep telling this story, but like that guy last year who, in the States, he went around to Kmart's, which is where the poor people shop. And he went around and, you know, they buy things on layaway, and they come in every week and they pay their $5, you know. And he went around to Kmart's and paid off these poor people's layaway, you know, and they come in to make their $5 payment, and oh, sir, someone has paid off your account in full. Well, there must be some mistake. Who did that? Oh no, he prefers to remain anonymous. Like that is a way to behave that doesn't fit into the reality bubble if everyone's out for themselves.
Yeah.
And maybe the other rich guys who are this guy's friend, like he could do that, and they might witness him doing that or doing something else. And even if he doesn't, and especially if he doesn't say, you know, what's wrong with you? But he just does it. Then it awakens something in them, like, yeah, you know, the world doesn't work the way I thought, and I could do that too.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, or someone like Polly, you know, stepping out and saying things that everybody's secretly thinking. Like it gives them the courage to do that too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that was the feeling we all had tonight, that you were all saying stuff that we were thinking, but you're putting it so eloquently and joining the dots. And it wasn't an angry meeting. We didn't feel like we were activists there. We thought we were sitting there with people that were questioning the big questions in life. You know, perhaps like the ancient Greeks did when they sat around a sofa and they thought, all right, let's think about life and what it's really about. And this was a common theme that you talk about, Charles, is what are we? It seems to me you've come to where you are because if you thought, what are the truths in life and what are we and how can we live from that space and get rid of the pretense and the stuff that we don't need. I think is that your passion? I mean, why you've come together is because you're two people who have big ideas and you like to have the big questions. Is that what started this relationship in this evening tonight?
Well,
I think we just thought it'd be fun. Actually.
Yeah, fun. Okay.
More than anything else.
Yeah.
Someone actually once said to me years ago, you know, Polly, just think big. And it was a really freeing thing for someone to say that to me, to think, yeah, you know, you're right. And how big is big, and how big can we go with an idea? And everything I'm doing really it allows me to be expansive because I've given myself permission to think big. And I really enjoy other people who think big as well, even if it's coming from a place that really doesn't fundamentally kind of fit with where I am. Because actually I think it's great that they're out there just questioning and challenging.
Yeah, me too. Like even like Richard Branson or someone like that, you know, like
he thinks big.
He thinks big, you know, like
and he's starting to have really deep questions.
I'm sure, you can kind of sense it.
He's finding Gaia. It's no business as usual. It's taken him on a journey. It's exciting.
Yeah, and I mean, it was a theme you brought up earlier that is on the margins. So people like Richard that's pioneering, like yourselves, it's on the margins of society where you find the space to think big and question because you're not stuck on the tracks.
Yes, absolutely.
So we need to create that kind of space to have these discussions.
Yes.
Okay, so I have the last question, which perhaps we're going to think smaller now, or it can be big. But if you could tell people, we're on camera now, one action that you can take away and do in your lives, connected with law or connected with economics, that can help bring positive change. Or what would it be? One thing.
Yeah, I don't usually like to prescribe things.
Okay.
You know, a lot of times people really, they kind of know what that action is. So I would say it's kind of deeper than an action, but I would say it would be to really like understand, to believe what you already know, which is that the purpose of your life is to give something, to contribute towards something larger than yourself that's beautiful to you, and just to believe that. Everyone knows that on some level, but we don't really believe it.
Right.
We don't really act from it because there's so many voices, internal and external, that contradict that knowing. So I guess I would just say to trust that, and as we trust that, then like what you were saying, like these opportunities kind of are attracted, you know, and then the doing comes in. Like something will manifest maybe just at the edge of your courage. Maybe it would have been beyond the edge of your courage, but now having affirmed yourself as a giver, it becomes natural. I really want to say yes to that.
Okay.
And I think also for me, I completely agree with all of this. But also what I've discovered works for me certainly is to really go with what makes your heart sing. You know, if it actually gives you intense enjoyment, if you know, I love my life. I love the people I'm meeting, the exciting people. You know, everywhere I go, I'm meeting more and more diverse, interesting people who are really actively getting out there and making their hearts sing in whatever it is that they're engaging in, and that seems to me a wonderful way of being in life. To tap into what makes my heart sing and follow that.
Yeah.
I've got a little story about that actually from one of these marvelous people. Maybe you've met her before, Philippa Pimentel.
No.
She's a Portuguese woman. She's like she's a Portuguese woman. She's she's an unpaid lobbyist. She used to be like a real lobbyist. She lives in Brussels, you know, and now she's lobbying for Transition Town. And she just makes magic happen. And anyway, she was telling me the story about this Transition Town group that was completely at odds, arguing like, you know, what is the most needed right now in our town? You know, should it be this, should it be that? And like getting nowhere. And then they just decided, we're only going to do what makes our hearts sing. Only going to do things that are fun, that we like. And then everything like started to flow.
Yeah.
And they got way more done. And anytime a new proposal came up, where someone said, well, should you really be doing that? The question they always came back to was exactly what you were saying. Does it make your heart sing?
Isn't that wonderful?
Wonderful. The revolution's got to be fun.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
definitely.
Without a doubt.
Yeah, and I felt, and this has been a lot of fun, and tonight was a lot of fun.
Great.
Yeah, I really enjoyed this. So.
Yeah.
Excellent. Okay,
Wonderful.
thank you very much,
All right.
Charles and Polly.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.